What if the problem isn't that life is too hard? What if the problem is that you're not strong enough yet? We spend years waiting, waiting for clarity, waiting for motivation, waiting for things to calm down. But life doesn't pause while you prepare. It keeps coming, relentless, unfair, demanding. So here's the uncomfortable truth. Before you ask the world to be kinder, quieter, or easier, you must become stronger first. And strength doesn't come from comfort. It comes from choosing responsibility when excuses feel safer. Number one, strength comes before comfort. People are taught, often without realizing it, to seek comfort first and strength later. They are encouraged to feel good before they act, to wait for motivation before they take responsibility, to soften reality so it doesn't demand too much of them. But comfort is not a foundation. Comfort is fragile, temporary, and dependent on circumstances staying favorable. The moment pressure appears, and it always does, comfort collapses, leaving the person unprepared and resentful. Strength, on the other hand, does not rely on circumstances being gentle. It is built precisely in moments where comfort is absent, and it is the only thing that remains when life becomes demanding. Strength is not created in moments of ease. It is formed when effort is required and resistance is present. When you choose discipline over impulse, responsibility over avoidance, structure over chaos, you are training yourself to tolerate discomfort without breaking. This process is slow and often unrewarding in the short term. There is no applause for consistency, no immediate relief for doing the difficult thing. But each time you endure what you once avoided, your capacity expands. What once felt overwhelming becomes manageable, and what once felt impossible becomes familiar. Comfort often disguises itself as self-care, but constant comfort weakens perception and dulls resilience. When discomfort is treated as a threat rather than a signal for growth, the individual becomes increasingly sensitive to stress, conflict, and effort. This sensitivity leads to fragility, where even minor challenges feel intolerable. Strength reverses this pattern by voluntarily stepping into difficulty, physical effort, emotional honesty, disciplined routine. You teach your mind and body that discomfort is survivable. That lesson changes how you interpret pressure, fear, and uncertainty. The pursuit of comfort delays growth because it removes the necessity to adapt. When everything is arranged to feel easy, there is no reason to develop patience, endurance, or courage. Strength demands engagement with reality as it is, not as you wish it to be. It requires accepting that life will involve strain, responsibility, and sacrifice, regardless of how prepared you feel. The goal is not to eliminate discomfort, but to become someone who can carry it without resentment or collapse. When strength is established first, comfort becomes a byproduct rather than a dependency. You stop needing external conditions to be perfect in order to function. You can act under pressure, think clearly during uncertainty, and remain steady when circumstances shift. Comfort gained after strength is stable and earned. Comfort sought before strength is unstable and temporary, leaving the individual constantly negotiating with life instead of meeting it directly. Number two, responsibility builds resilience. Resilience is often misunderstood as something you either have or you don't, as if some people are naturally tougher while others are simply fragile. In reality, resilience is built through repeated exposure to responsibility. When you take ownership of your actions, your decisions, and the consequences that follow, you begin to develop an internal structure that can withstand pressure. Avoiding responsibility may offer temporary relief, but it slowly weakens the individual, creating a dependence on circumstances, validation, or rescue. Responsibility removes that dependence by forcing you to stand in reality rather than escape from it. Taking responsibility means accepting that your choices matter, even when the outcomes are uncomfortable. It means recognizing that blaming circumstances, other people, or bad luck does nothing to strengthen you. When responsibility is avoided, problems accumulate quietly in the background, growing more complex and more overwhelming over time. When responsibility is accepted, even small actions begin to restore a sense of agency. Agency is the root of resilience because it reinforces the belief that you can respond, adapt, and recover rather than collapse when things go wrong. Responsibility also teaches emotional regulation. When you are accountable, you cannot afford to be ruled by impulse, resentment, or self-pity. You are required to act despite discomfort, fatigue, or uncertainty. This repeated exposure to controlled stress trains your nervous system to remain stable under pressure. Over time, what once triggered anxiety or avoidance becomes manageable. You learn that discomfort does not require escape, and difficulty does not equal danger. That understanding is what allows resilience to form at a deep internal level. Avoiding responsibility keeps life small. It narrows your tolerance for challenge and limits your capacity to grow. The more responsibility you carry, the more complex problems you are able to handle. This is not about taking on everything at once, but about steadily increasing the weight you can manage without breaking. Each responsibility you accept and fulfill becomes evidence that you can be trusted with more. That trust, built internally, becomes a stabilizing force that doesn't depend on external reassurance. Resilience is not built by waiting for life to become manageable. It is built by stepping forward when things are uncertain and choosing to respond rather than withdraw. Responsibility forces you into contact with reality, and reality, when faced directly, strengthens rather than weakens. The individual who accepts responsibility becomes harder to destabilize, not because life stops being difficult, but because difficulty no longer has the power to dismantle their sense of control and internal order. Number 3, order creates inner stability. Inner instability rarely appears without cause. It is often the result of prolonged disorder, unfinished tasks, neglected responsibilities, inconsistent routines, and environments that reflect confusion rather than intention. When the external world is chaotic, the mind is forced to constantly react instead of think. Attention becomes fragmented, energy is drained, and emotional regulation weakens. Order is not about perfection or control. It is about reducing unnecessary friction so the mind can operate without being under constant threat. Creating order begins with the physical environment because it is the most immediate and visible reflection of internal state. A cluttered space silently reinforces the idea that things are unmanageable, that problems can be ignored rather than addressed. When you clean, organize, and structure your surroundings, you send a different signal to yourself. You demonstrate that chaos can be confronted and reduced. This simple act restores a sense of agency, and agency is essential for psychological stability. The environment stops demanding constant attention, allowing mental clarity to return. Order extends beyond physical space into time and behavior. Unstructured days create anxiety because the mind is left to negotiate every decision in real time. Routines remove that burden. They create predictability, which the nervous system relies on to remain calm. When actions are consistent, energy is conserved, and discipline replaces emotional volatility. This does not eliminate stress, but it prevents unnecessary stress from accumulating. Stability emerges not from avoiding responsibility, but from managing it systematically. Disorder encourages impulsive behavior. When there is no structure, emotions dictate actions, leading to cycles of avoidance, guilt, and self-criticism. Order interrupts this cycle by placing boundaries around behavior. These boundaries are not restrictions, they are supports. They create a framework within which effort can be sustained without burnout. Over time, this consistency builds self-trust. You begin to rely on your own systems rather than fluctuating motivation or external pressure. Inner stability is not a mood. It is a condition created through repeated, disciplined action. Order reduces cognitive noise, allowing you to think more clearly, respond more deliberately, and endure stress without being overwhelmed. It transforms life from something that constantly demands reaction into something that can be navigated with intention. When order is established externally, it gradually becomes internal, reinforcing emotional regulation, resilience, and a quiet confidence rooted in structure rather than chaos. Number 4, pain is a teacher, not an enemy. Pain is often treated as something that should be avoided at all costs, as if its presence automatically means something has gone wrong. From an early age, people learn to associate discomfort with danger, failure, or weakness, and this association shapes how they respond to difficulty later in life. When pain appears, emotional, physical, or psychological, the instinct is to escape it as quickly as possible. But pain is not random. It arrives with information. It signals limits, exposes neglect, and reveals areas where growth is required. When pain is avoided, the lesson it carries is delayed rather than eliminated. Suppressed discomfort does not disappear. It transforms into anxiety, resentment, or numbness. These secondary responses often cause more long-term damage than the original pain itself. Facing pain directly allows it to serve its purpose. It forces attention toward what has been ignored, denied, or postponed. In this way, pain becomes a guide rather than a threat, pointing toward necessary change. Endurance is not built through ease. It is developed by learning how to remain present while experiencing discomfort without immediately reacting to it. This process strengthens emotional regulation and teaches the nervous system that pain does not require panic. Each time discomfort is faced without collapse, confidence grows, not the loud kind, but a quiet assurance that difficulty can be survived. This internal shift changes how future challenges are perceived, reducing fear and increasing stability. Pain also clarifies values. It strips away distractions and forces honesty. When something hurts, it becomes impossible to pretend that everything is fine. This clarity can be uncomfortable, but it is precise. It shows where boundaries are needed, where effort has been insufficient, or where attachment has become unhealthy. Ignoring these signals leads to repeated cycles of suffering. Listening to them creates the possibility of adaptation and growth. Treating pain as an enemy turns life into a constant battle against reality. Treating it as a teacher transforms hardship into instruction. This does not mean seeking suffering or glorifying it. It means recognizing that pain has a function and that resisting it entirely weakens resilience. When pain is approached with attention rather than avoidance, it loses its power to destabilize and instead becomes a source of insight, discipline, and psychological strength. Number 5. Self-respect is earned, not given. Many people assume that respect from others will automatically translate into self-respect, or that being treated well by the world validates their worth. This is a misconception. Self-respect does not originate externally. It is cultivated internally through consistent actions, choices, and adherence to personal principles. When you wait for others to grant respect, you surrender control over your own sense of value. True self-respect comes from a commitment to integrity, accountability, and the courage to hold yourself to standards even when it is uncomfortable or inconvenient. Earning self-respect requires conscious effort. It begins with small, deliberate actions, keeping promises to yourself, following through on commitments, and honoring your own boundaries. Every choice to act in alignment with your values reinforces the understanding that you are worthy of care and consideration. Conversely, when you compromise your principles, procrastinate, or make excuses for inaction, you erode self-respect. These are not dramatic failures. They are quiet betrayals of your own authority over your life. Self-respect is built not by words or intentions or aspirations, but by repeated, tangible demonstrations that you can be trusted by yourself. Boundaries are central to this process. Respecting yourself means refusing to accept treatment that diminishes your value or compromises your integrity. This can be uncomfortable because it often involves confrontation, saying no when it is easier to say yes, and standing firm even when others resist or criticize. Each instance of boundary setting strengthens your internal framework, teaching you that your needs, values, and dignity are non-negotiable. People may respond with resistance or misunderstanding, but self-respect is not dependent on their approval. It is dependent on your commitment to uphold your own standards. Self-respect also requires accountability. Owning your mistakes, facing consequences, and learning from failure is far more important than avoiding blame or seeking validation. This practice develops resilience and teaches that your worth is not diminished by setbacks, but reinforced by the way you navigate them. Over time, the cumulative effect of consistent action, integrity, and accountability forms a self-trust that is unshakable. When you earn self-respect, it creates a foundation for every other relationship and every other challenge in life, because it ensures that your value is grounded in reality rather than opinion, perception, or circumstance. Number 6. You can't save others while you're breaking. There is a tendency in many people to pour themselves into others' lives in an attempt to fix, protect, or save them, even when their own foundation is unstable. It feels noble to prioritize someone else's struggles over your own, but this approach is ultimately destructive. You cannot offer stability, clarity, or support if you are yourself overwhelmed, exhausted, or fractured. When the source is depleted, everything flowing from it becomes tainted or unsustainable. The instinct to rescue others before first attending to your own needs is often rooted in fear, guilt, or a desire for approval, but it rarely achieves the outcome intended and often deepens personal vulnerability. Strength and stability are prerequisites for meaningful contribution. When your own life is in disarray, your judgments are clouded, your energy is limited, and your decisions are reactive rather than deliberate. Attempts to help others in this state often create dependency, miscommunication, or burnout. By first attending to your own growth, emotional regulation, and internal resilience, you position yourself as a source of support that is reliable, consistent, and effective. This does not mean abandoning empathy or compassion. It means recognizing that empathy without capacity becomes a burden rather than a gift. Self-care and boundaries are essential components of this process. Prioritizing recovery, reflection, and personal responsibility is not selfish. It is necessary. When you honor your limits and take deliberate steps to stabilize your life, you demonstrate to yourself and others that strength is cultivated through attention, discipline, and patience. You cannot convince someone to value or respect you if you are neglecting your own well-being. The act of rebuilding internally equips you to engage with others from a position of clarity, not desperation, and influence without losing yourself in the process. Breaking does not happen instantly. It is often gradual and cumulative. Overextension, chronic stress, unresolved emotional conflict, and avoidance of personal accountability all contribute to a state in which attempts to save others become damaging. Recognizing this requires brutal honesty and the willingness to step back, sometimes temporarily, from roles or expectations imposed by external pressure. By focusing first on your own recovery and fortification, you ensure that the energy you invest in others is sustainable, meaningful, and transformative, rather than reactive, scattered, or draining. Remember, you cannot pour from an empty cup. Strength, resilience, and self-respect must be built within before they can extend outward. Focus on fortifying yourself first, and everything you touch afterward will be grounded, purposeful, and lasting. Your growth is the foundation for everything else.